When my parents died, everything changed overnight. One moment, we were a family, messy and imperfect but ours. The next, I was being pulled apart from the only home I'd ever known. My brother and I, just two boys thrown into a world that suddenly felt cold and unrecognizable. I was 10, my brother only 7. We didn't understand why mom and dad didn't come home one day. The ambulance, the hospital, the whispered words of grown-ups that made no sense. And then the silence, the unbearable silence where their voices used to be. After the funeral, everything became a blur of questions and decisions that I had no control over. Our grandparents, who lived a few states away, came to visit. They cried and hugged us, promising to take care of us both. But promises, I was learning, could be broken. A few days later, I overheard a conversation between my grandparents and a social worker. They wanted to adopt my little brother but not me. Their reason was chilling. Boys are harder to raise, they said, especially teenagers. Your brother is still young, we can manage him better. I was only 10, barely a teenager, but that didn't matter. To them, I was already too much trouble. The thought that they wanted one of us but not both cut deeper than I could explain. My brother didn't know what was happening, he was just happy to be with them. But I was sent away to foster care, to a system that felt like a maze with no exit. Living in foster care was like living in a house full of strangers, where no one wanted to stay and no one really cared. Families came and went, some kind, some cruel. I learned quickly to keep my guard up, to pretend I was okay when I was anything but. I missed my brother desperately. We wrote letters, but they were few and far between, and my heart ached every time I read his words. School became both a refuge and a battlefield. I wanted to learn, to prove I was worth something, but the weight of abandonment followed me. Teachers tried to help, but how could anyone understand the boy who'd lost everything? I fought with the unfairness of it all. Why was my brother chosen and not me? Was it because I was older? Because I was a boy? The questions haunted me, but answers never came. I learned to rely on myself, to build a shield so strong that no one could break through. Years passed in a blur of homes and faces. But through it all, a fire burned inside me, a determination to survive, to find my place in the world. I promised myself that one day, I'd reunite with my brother, that we'd rebuild what was lost. The journey wasn't easy. I faced setbacks, heartbreak, and moments when giving up seemed like the only option. But every time I felt like falling, I remembered my parents' love, the hope in my brother's letters, and the promise I made to myself. Eventually, I found people who cared, mentors, friends, even foster parents who saw beyond my scars. They helped me heal, helped me believe that family isn't just about blood, but about who chooses to stand by you. When I finally reunited with my brother years later, it was like coming home after a long, lonely journey. We were different, changed by our separate paths, but the bond remained unbroken. Together, we began to write a new story, one where love and resilience conquered loss. This is my story. A story of pain, survival, and hope. A story of a boy who was left behind but never gave up on family. In those early days of foster care, I felt like a ghost in my own life. The house was strange and unfamiliar, with creaky floors and the smell of someone else's home, not mine. My foster parents were kind enough, but I could see the hesitation in their eyes, how they didn't really know what to do with a kid like me. I was quiet, withdrawn, carrying the weight of my parents' death and the sting of being separated from my brother. School was hard. I wasn't just the kid with no parents, I was the kid with no family, the kid who had been rejected by the people who were supposed to love him most. I remember sitting in the cafeteria, watching other kids laugh with their families, feeling like an outsider looking in. But I also found small pockets of kindness, teachers who stayed after class to help me catch up, classmates who didn't ask questions but just included me. Letters from my brother became my lifeline. He was young, but his words were full of hope and love. "I miss you," he'd write. "I want to see you again." Those letters were tattered from being read and reread, but I kept every single one. They were reminders that I wasn't alone, even when everything felt like it was falling apart. As I grew older, the foster care system threw more challenges my way. I was moved to different homes, sometimes because my behavior was too much for the foster families to handle. I wasn't perfect. I was angry and scared and confused. But beneath it all, I was just a kid trying to survive. There were moments of deep loneliness, nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my brother was thinking of me too. I longed for the days when we were kids playing together, dreaming about the future. It felt like those memories belonged to someone else, a happier version of me that had been stolen. But I didn't give up. I buried myself in schoolwork, sports, anything that could distract me from the pain. I learned to fight for myself, to speak up when I needed help. Slowly, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond foster care. When I turned 18, the system let me go officially an adult, officially on my own. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. I had no family to fall back on, no safety net. But I had the promise I made to myself to find my brother, to build a life where we could be together again. I started searching. I contacted social workers, lawyers, anyone who might help me find him. It wasn't easy, records were incomplete. People had moved. But I didn't stop. Every small lead was a step closer. Finally, after years of searching, I found him. He was living with our grandparents, who had adopted him like they promised. He looked different, older, but when he saw me, his eyes filled with recognition and tears. We embraced, the years of separation melting away in that moment. Rebuilding our relationship wasn't instant. We had to navigate the pain and confusion of the past, the years we'd lost. But we talked openly, shared our stories, and slowly, the brotherhood that had been interrupted began to heal. We made new memories, late night talks, family dinners, supporting each other through life's ups and downs. It wasn't the perfect family we once dreamed of, but it was ours. And that was enough. Looking back, I understand why things happened the way they did. It wasn't fair, and it still hurts. But those hardships shaped me into who I am: a survivor, a fighter, a brother who never gave up. My story is one of loss, but also of hope. Of finding family not just in blood, but in love and perseverance. And I carry that story with me every day, a reminder that no matter what life throws at you, you can rise again. Reconnecting with my brother after all those years was both joyous and challenging. The moment we found each other, I thought the missing pieces would just fall into place, but real life is never that simple. We were different now, shaped by separate experiences, different pains, and separate hopes. There was so much to catch up on, so much to understand. Our first few meetings were awkward. We talked about the big things, our parents, the years apart, but also stumbled over the small stuff. What was his favorite food now? Did he still like the same music? Did he remember our childhood games? Sometimes, silence filled the gaps, but we learned that was okay too. He told me about life with our grandparents, how they loved him and kept him safe, but also about the loneliness he sometimes felt without me. I shared stories about foster homes, about the nights I cried myself to sleep, the teachers who believed in me, the friends I made. It was painful but healing, like stitching a torn fabric back together. One day, we sat under a tree in the park, the same park where we used to play as kids. I said, "I'm sorry you had to grow up without me around." He smiled, "I'm sorry you had to go through all that alone." In that moment, the weight of years apart lifted just a little. We weren't perfect, but we were together, and that was a new beginning. We made a pact to build a future together, to be brothers in the truest sense, no matter what. Slowly, we started spending more time as a family. We invited our grandparents to dinners, and even though there were difficult conversations about the past, we faced them honestly. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was possible. I also began to open up about my pain, the feelings of rejection and abandonment that had shaped me. Talking about those feelings didn't make me weaker, it made me stronger. My brother listened, and I listened to him, and we found strength in our shared vulnerability. Rebuilding my trust in family was a journey. I learned that family isn't just about biology or who raises you, but about who loves you through your darkest times. My grandparents, despite their earlier choices, showed me that they wanted to be part of my life now. It wasn't perfect, but it was genuine. As I stepped into adulthood, I held tightly to the lessons foster care taught me: the value of resilience, the power of hope, and the importance of never giving up. I also learned that healing takes time and that love, even after loss and separation, can find a way to grow again. Together, my brother and I began to dream again, not just about what we lost, but about what we could build. We talked about college, careers, travel, and one day, maybe starting families of our own. We knew the road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but we faced it side by side. Looking back, I realized that being left in foster care was a pain I carry, but it doesn't define me. Instead, it fuels my desire to create a life filled with love, compassion, and belonging for myself and for those I care about. This is my story of loss and reunion, of hardship and hope. A story that shows no matter how broken things seem, there's always a chance to find your way back home. As we stepped into adulthood, the bond between my brother and me grew stronger with every shared experience. We had both carried scars from our past, but together, those scars became reminders of how far we'd come. I enrolled in community college, determined to build a future beyond the shadows of foster care. My brother, having graduated high school a few years earlier, started working and saved up to support both of us in small ways. We were learning to lean on each other, not just as siblings, but as partners in life. We faced new challenges balancing work and school, dealing with the pressures of adult responsibilities, and navigating relationships outside our little family. There were days when the weight of our past felt heavy, when memories of abandonment crept back, and doubts whispered in the quiet moments. But on those days, we had each other. A late-night phone call, a shared meal, a simple text reminding us we weren't alone. Our grandparents, too, began to play a more consistent role in our lives. It wasn't perfect. Old wounds sometimes surfaced in tense conversations, and trust had to be rebuilt slowly. But seeing them with my brother, and gradually with me, brought a bittersweet sense of closure and new beginnings. They hadn't been there for me when it mattered most, but they wanted to be there now, and that meant something. One of the most powerful moments came when my brother and I, sitting around a modest dinner table with our grandparents, openly talked about the past, the pain, the mistakes, the hopes for the future. It wasn't easy. Tears were shed. Words were spoken that had been locked away for years. But in that vulnerability, we found healing. Forgiveness wasn't instant, but it was possible. As I continued my studies, I found a passion for social work, driven by my own experiences in foster care. I wanted to help kids like me, those caught in the system, feeling lost and forgotten. My brother supported this dream wholeheartedly, encouraging me during the toughest semesters and celebrating every small victory. Together, we dreamed of making a difference, turning our pain into purpose, outside of family and school. I began to build a life filled with friendships and even found love. Navigating relationships after such a tumultuous childhood was daunting, but I approached them with honesty and openness. My partner learned about my past, about the family I'd lost and found again, and stood by me through every step of healing. It was a new kind of love, one built on trust, understanding, and patience. My brother, too, found his own path. He discovered a talent for art, using it as a way to express feelings he struggled to put into words. We encouraged each other's dreams, celebrated milestones, and supported one another through setbacks. Through it all, the pain of being separated as kids never fully disappeared. It was a thread woven into the fabric of our lives. But it no longer controlled us. Instead, it fueled a fierce determination to create a family defined not by loss, but by love, resilience, and hope. Looking back on everything, the heartbreak, the struggle, the triumphs, I'm proud of how far we've come. My brother and I have rebuilt what was broken, creating a family forged not just by blood, but by unwavering commitment to each other. Our story isn't perfect, and it never will be. But it's real. And it's ours. As the years passed, my brother and I settled into a rhythm that felt like home. We were no longer just survivors of a broken system, we were partners in life, united by shared history and a fierce commitment to each other. Our relationship, once fragile and tentative, grew stronger through every challenge and triumph. I graduated with a degree in social work, and my first job was with an organization that helped children in foster care. Every day, I walked into the office carrying the weight of my past but also the hope of making a difference. I met kids who reminded me of myself, scared and certain, but full of potential. I became their advocate, their voice, their fierce protector. I wanted to ensure that no child would feel as lost and forgotten as I once did. My brother continued to pursue his art. What started as a private outlet for his emotions soon blossomed into something beautiful and public. His paintings, raw and powerful, began to attract attention at local galleries. Art became his language, his way of telling the story. We both shared the pain, the healing, the hope. We celebrated these milestones together. The opening of his first gallery show was a night filled with laughter, tears, and pride. Our grandparents came too, standing quietly in the back, their eyes moist with unsaid apologies and newfound love. It was imperfect, but it was real. We both found love outside our brotherhood as well. I met someone who understood my past and embraced me fully, the scars, the stories, and all. My brother found a partner who celebrated his creativity and stood by him through the ups and downs. Our partners became extensions of our family, weaving their own threads into the tapestry of our lives. Together, we built traditions, Sunday dinners, birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings. We created a space where laughter outweighed sorrow and belonging outweighed loss. Our family was no longer defined by who abandoned us but by who chose to stay and love us fiercely. Looking back, I realized that the pain of being separated from my brother and thrust into foster care never truly left me. But it no longer defines me. Instead, it fuels my compassion, strengthens my resolve, and deepens my gratitude for the family we've rebuilt. Our journey has been far from easy, marked by heartbreak, struggle, and moments of doubt. But through it all, love has been our anchor. The love between brothers, between parents and children, between friends and partners. This is our story, one of loss and reunion, pain and healing, separation, and the unbreakable bonds that brought us back together. And as we move forward, hand in hand, I carry hope in my heart, a hope that no matter the darkness, family can be found, rebuilt, and forever cherished. As the years unfolded, I found myself reflecting often on the twists and turns that led me here. The boy who had once felt invisible in the foster care system had grown into a man with a purpose, a voice, and a family he'd fought hard to reclaim. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving. My brother and I, though shaped by hardship, refused to let our past define our future. We were determined to break the cycle, to build lives grounded in love, trust, and kindness. It wasn't always easy. There were still days when old wounds ached, when the ghosts of rejection whispered their doubts. But together, we faced those shadows head on, refusing to be prisoners of pain. Our relationship deepened in ways I never imagined possible. We celebrated each other's victories, no matter how small, and held space through setbacks. There was a strength in knowing someone else had walked a similar path, someone who understood the language of loss and resilience without needing explanation. I threw myself into my work with renewed passion, fueled by the stories of the kids I met every day. I saw myself in them, the fear, the loneliness, the desperate hope for belonging. I became their advocate, their champion, determined to be the adult I had needed when I was young. It was difficult work, emotionally draining at times, but deeply rewarding. I know I was making a difference, one child at a time. My brother's art continued to evolve, gaining recognition far beyond our small town. His pieces captured raw emotion, pain, hope, struggle, and triumph, resonating with many who saw their own stories reflected in his brushstrokes. Watching him grow into the artist he was meant to be filled me with pride. He was telling the story we both lived, giving voice to the silent parts of our past. Together, we built a community around us, friends who became family, partners who brought love and laughter, mentors who guided us. The family I'd once lost had been rebuilt, not by circumstance, but by choice. There were moments of quiet reflection when I think about my grandparents, their decisions, their regrets, their efforts to make amends. Forgiveness was a journey, not a destination. I learned to accept that they were flawed humans, just like me, capable of mistakes, but also capable of love. We found a way to coexist, imperfect but genuine. Sometimes, I wondered how different my life might have been if my brother and I had stayed together, if our grandparents had chosen differently. But those thoughts no longer held power over me. Instead, I focused on the present, the family I had now, the life I was building, the legacy I hoped to leave. I understood that family isn't always perfect or fair. Sometimes, it's messy and painful. But it's also a source of strength, hope, and healing. My story is one of loss, yes, but also of resilience and love, of finding light in the darkest places and creating a home where none seemed possible. And as I look forward, I carry with me the belief that no matter how broken things seem, the human heart has an incredible capacity to heal and to love fiercely, deeply, and endlessly. I never imagined my life would unravel like this. The moment I found out my wife was cheating on me, everything changed. I had always trusted her, or at least, I thought I did. We built a life together, or so I believed, filled with plans, dreams, and the usual ups and downs of marriage. But beneath the surface, there was a secret she kept from me, a betrayal that cut deeper than I could have ever anticipated. It started with small suspicions. She became distant, her phone glued to her hand, conversations that ended abruptly whenever I walked into the room. At first, I tried to brush it off, maybe work stress, maybe something else weighing on her mind. But my gut told me otherwise. I started paying attention, noticing the little things that didn't add up. Late nights out, unexplained messages, a sudden interest in dressing up more than usual. The signs were there, and I couldn't ignore them. One evening, I stayed up late, pretending to be asleep while I watched her text on her phone. The name that popped up was unfamiliar, a man named Jason. My heart sank as I read the messages, sweet and intimate, words that didn't belong to me. It was undeniable. She was cheating. The betrayal was like a punch to the gut. I felt anger, hurt, disbelief swirling inside me. How long had this been going on? Why? What did I do wrong? But amidst the pain, something else grew inside me, a cold resolve. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I was going to fight back. I began gathering evidence. Secretly, I followed her on days she said she was busy with work, documented their meetings, their texts, and their calls. I learned everything about this Jason, his job, his family, his wife. And that's when the idea came to me: if my wife could betray me, I could expose his betrayal too. His wife deserved to know the truth just as much as I did. I reached out anonymously to Jason's wife, sending her proof of the affair. At first, she didn't believe me. But when the evidence arrived, clear and undeniable, the world she thought she knew shattered. Their marriage, once seemingly perfect, began to crumble under the weight of deceit. Meanwhile, I confronted my wife. The conversation was raw and painful. She admitted everything but showed little remorse. Her betrayal was deep, and my heart broke anew. But I didn't let her see the full extent of my pain. Instead, I channeled it into strength. I decided to reclaim my life, to no longer be a pawn in her games. The fallout was messy. Jason's marriage ended in divorce, the shock sending ripples through our social circles. My wife and I separated, the trust irrevocably broken. But through the chaos, I found clarity. I rediscovered myself, my worth beyond the pain she caused. It wasn't easy. There were days filled with doubt and loneliness, nights haunted by memories. But I surrounded myself with friends and family who reminded me I was not alone. I sought therapy to heal the wounds that ran deeper than just betrayal, wounds of self-worth and trust. Slowly, I rebuilt. I found joy in small things and moments of laughter, in new hobbies and passions. I learned to trust again, cautiously, but with hope. And most importantly, I forgave not to absolve her, but to free myself from the chains of bitterness. Looking back, that dark chapter of my life taught me resilience. It showed me that even in the deepest pain, there's a way forward. I emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace a future defined not by betrayal, but by healing and growth. After the initial storm of betrayal and confrontation, life didn't simply settle into calm. Instead, it felt like I was walking through a long, dark tunnel, and sure if there was any light at the end. Each day brought a new wave of memories, doubts, and emotions crashing over me. Some mornings, I woke up feeling numb, as if my heart had been replaced with stone. Other times, the anger flared so hot it made my hands shake. The divorce was brutal. It wasn't just the legal battles or the division of assets, it was the emotional warfare. Every interaction felt like reliving the hurt. She was unapologetic in many ways, even cold. There was no remorse, no real explanation, just an unspoken dismissal of what we once had. I realized then that her affair wasn't about me or our marriage, it was about her own issues, her own emptiness that she chose to fill with lies. But as difficult as it was, I knew I had to keep moving forward. I refused to let bitterness consume me. I threw myself into work, volunteering with organizations that helped people overcome trauma and rebuild their lives. Helping others gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I began to understand that pain can be transformed into strength when used to uplift, not destroy. Jason's wife reached out to me a few months after everything had fallen apart. She thanked me for the truth. Even though it had shattered her world, she was kind but still hurting, and we found an unexpected connection in our shared experience of betrayal. Sometimes, life's cruel twists forge strange alliances. We spoke about forgiveness, trust, and how difficult it was to rebuild after someone you love breaks your world apart. I also started therapy, something I had avoided for years, thinking I could handle everything on my own. But I realized healing required more than willpower, it required guidance. In those sessions, I confronted my insecurities, my fears, and the ways my self-worth had been shattered. Bit by bit, I began to reclaim my identity, not as a betrayed husband, but as a man worthy of love and respect. One of the hardest lessons was learning to trust again. Every new relationship was shadowed by fear of betrayal, fear of abandonment. I was cautious, guarded, sometimes even distant. But slowly, I opened myself up, learning that vulnerability was not weakness, but strength. I met someone new eventually, as someone who saw me for who I truly was, scars and all, and chose to stay. That new relationship wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It taught me that love can be beautiful again, even after betrayal. It reminded me that people are complex and flawed, but also capable of growth and redemption. Looking back, the affair that once threatened to destroy me became the catalyst for my transformation. It forced me to face painful truths, to let go of illusions, and to rebuild from the ruins. I'm not the same man I was before. I'm stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Life taught me that betrayal can shatter you, but it doesn't have to define you. It's what you do after the fall that shapes who you become. The months turned into years, and as time passed, the sharp edges of betrayal began to dull. I wouldn't say I forgot. I don't think anyone truly forgets that kind of pain, but I no longer let it govern my every thought. Instead, I found myself focusing on what lay ahead, not on what had been lost. I moved to a new city. It wasn't an escape, but a fresh start. The familiar streets and places that once held happy memories had become haunted by what they represented, a life that no longer existed. In this new place, I could walk freely without the constant reminder of what had happened. I furnished a small apartment just the way I liked it, filling it with things that reflected who I was now, not who I used to be. Work flourished. I threw myself into new projects, took risks I might have shied away from before. There was something liberating in realizing I had survived my darkest moments. If I could get through that, what couldn't I handle? My colleagues saw the change in me. I was more focused, more driven, but also somehow calmer, more centered. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was working for myself, for my future. The connection I had with Jason's ex-wife, Emily, evolved into a quiet friendship. We would check in from time to time, not out of shared misery, but mutual respect. We both knew what it meant to have your world turned upside down. We encouraged each other, celebrated small victories, and reminded one another that we deserve peace. And then, as life often does, it surprised me. I met someone new. It wasn't planned or forced. It happened in the most ordinary of moments at a coffee shop where I'd gone to escape my thoughts. Her name was Claire. She was kind, with a warmth that felt like sunlight after years of cold. I was cautious at first, unsure if my heart could risk being broken again. But she didn't rush me. She simply offered understanding and patience. With Claire, I learned to trust again. It wasn't easy. Every now and then, fear would creep in, fear that history would repeat itself, that love was just a prelude to pain. But she showed me, in countless small ways, that love could be safe, honest, and real. She listened without judgment, supported without smothering, and loved without conditions. Together, we built something new. Not perfect, nothing ever is, but genuine. I shared my past with her not as a burden, but as part of who I was. And she accepted it, accepted me, and helped me see that I was more than the scars I carried. There were moments when I still thought about my ex-wife, not out of longing, but reflection. I wondered if she ever regretted what she'd done, if she ever thought about the damage left in the wake of her choices. But I didn't dwell on it. I had forgiven her in my heart, not because she asked for it, but because I needed to let go of the weight. Carrying that bitterness would have only kept me trapped in the past. Jason's life, from what I heard, took a different path. His choices cost him his marriage, his reputation, and in many ways, his peace. I didn't take pleasure in that. I didn't need to. I had already found my own form of justice by moving on and building something better. Now, as I look at the life I've built, I feel proud. Proud that I didn't let betrayal define me. Proud that I turned pain into strength. Proud that I opened my heart again, even when it felt safer to close it off forever. Betrayal broke me once, but it didn't break me forever. Instead, it taught me resilience, compassion, and above all, hope. Clara and I built our life slowly, thoughtfully, without the rush that often comes from trying to fill a void. I think that's what made it different. We weren't trying to erase the past or cover up old wounds. Instead, we acknowledged them, learned from them, and allowed them to shape how we treated each other. There was a quiet understanding between us that love, real love, required patience, honesty, and effort every single day. We spent countless evenings just talking. Sometimes it was about trivial things, movies, books, plans for the weekend. Other times it was deeper in our fears, our hopes, the parts of ourselves we didn't always show to the world. With Claire, I felt safe in a way I hadn't felt in years. There was no pretense, no hidden agenda. She didn't want to change me, and I didn't want to change her. We simply chose each other, day after day. We traveled together, exploring places neither of us had seen before. Every trip felt like a small reclaiming of joy, as if we were collecting moments to replace the ones tarnished by betrayal. I remember standing with her at the edge of the ocean, watching the sun sink below the horizon, feeling at peace. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't haunted by what had been. I was simply grateful for what was. Work continued to thrive, but it no longer consumed me the way it once did. I learned balance. I learned that success wasn't just about achievements or recognition, it was about living a life that felt whole. I mentored younger colleagues, hoping to pass on not just skills, but wisdom about resilience and integrity. I wanted them to know that setbacks didn't define them, that strength could be found even in the darkest places. My relationship with my own family deepened too. For a while, I had kept them at a distance, ashamed of how broken I had felt after the betrayal. But with time, I let them back in. They reminded me of who I was before the pain, and they celebrated who I was becoming because of it. Family dinners, quiet weekends together, shared laughter, these became the foundation of a new kind of happiness. As for my ex-wife, she became a memory that no longer hurt. I didn't wish her ill. I hoped, in some distant way, that she found what she was looking for. But I no longer thought of her with anger or sadness. She was part of a chapter that had ended, and I was living in a new one, one filled with hope and love. Claire and I eventually talked about marriage. Not because we needed a piece of paper to validate what we had, but because we wanted to build a future together. We wanted to create a home that reflected the honesty and strength of our bond. When I asked her to marry me, it wasn't with grand gestures or dramatic speeches. It was simple, heartfelt, and real just like us. On our wedding day, as I stood beside her, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey that brought me here, for the pain that taught me resilience, for the love that taught me to hope again. Our vows weren't just promises to each other, they were acknowledgments of the past, affirmations of the present, and commitments to the future. Life moved forward, as it always does. There were challenges, of course. No life is without them. But together, Claire and I faced them with honesty, compassion, and strength. I often thought about how far I had come from the broken man who once felt lost in the shadow of betrayal, to someone who had rebuilt, healed, and found joy again. If I could go back and speak to the man I was on that night I first discovered the affair, I would tell him this: you will survive this. You will grow from this. And one day, you will look back and see that even in your deepest pain, you were finding your way toward something better. Because that's what betrayal taught me. That even when someone tries to break you, you can choose to rise. And when you do, you discover that the life you rebuild can be even more beautiful than the one you lost. As the years went on, the life Claire and I built together became a steady source of comfort and joy. We bought a small house, nothing extravagant, just a cozy place with a garden where she planted flowers and I learned to grow vegetables. It became our refuge, a symbol of the peace we had found together. Mornings were slow and gentle. We'd sit on the porch with coffee, watching the world wake up, grateful for the quiet simplicity that now filled our days. Claire wanted children, and so did I. After all the hurt of the past, I wasn't sure if fatherhood would ever be part of my future, but with her, it felt right. When our daughter was born, I remember holding her in my arms for the first time, overcome with emotion. She was small and perfect, and in that moment, I felt the weight of the past lift just a little more. She represented hope, a fresh start, the proof that love, real, lasting love, could still grow in the soil of heartache. Parenthood wasn't easy, of course. There were sleepless nights, endless worries, and moments when we doubted ourselves. But every challenge brought us closer together. We became a team in the truest sense, leaning on each other, learning from each other, and celebrating the small victories: a first smile, a first step, a first word. I often thought about how different this felt from my first marriage. With Claire, everything was built on transparency. There were sleepless nights, endless worries, and moments when we doubted ourselves. But every challenge brought us closer together. We became a team in the truest sense, leaning on each other, learning from each other, and celebrating the small victories: a first smile, a first step, a first word. I often thought about how different this felt from my first marriage. With Claire, everything was built on transparency. The man who stayed up at night wondering if he'd ever feel whole again. I didn't resent him. He was part of me, and he taught me how to endure. But I no longer let him steer my future. Instead, I honored him by living a life that proved he had survived, that he had grown stronger. The world didn't stop bringing challenges. There were job changes, health scares, moments of grief when we lost loved ones. But each hardship reminded me of what I'd learned: that we are defined not by what happens to us, but by how we choose to respond. And with every test, I chose to respond with love, with courage, with the belief that even the hardest times pass and leave behind new beginnings. Sometimes, people from my old life would reach out: old friends, former colleagues, even people who had known my ex-wife. They'd ask how I was, and I'd answer honestly, I was good. Not perfect, not without struggles, but good in the way that matters most. I had built a life that felt true to who I was and who I wanted to be. As our daughter grew, she began asking questions about family, about love, about what makes a marriage strong. I told her the truth and ways she could understand that love is about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. That honesty matters more than perfection. That mistakes can break us, but they can also teach us how to be better. And when she's older, I'll tell her more. I'll tell her about the time I thought my world had ended, and how it hadn't. How it had, in fact, just begun. How pain shaped me, but didn't destroy me. How betrayal taught me the true meaning of loyalty, and loss showed me the true value of love. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I sit in the garden, watching the sun set, and I think about how far I've come. I think about the broken man who once stood at the edge of despair, and the man I am now, a husband, a father, a survivor. And I feel at peace. Betrayal was a chapter in my story, but not the whole story. The whole story is one of resilience, of choosing hope, of building a life that is honest and full of love. And that, I've learned, is the greatest victory of all. As the seasons passed, I found myself appreciating the small moments more than I ever had before. It wasn't the grand events that defined happiness anymore, it was the quiet, everyday moments that stitched our life together. The sound of my daughter's laughter as she played in the backyard. The way Claire's hand found mine when we walked down the street. The smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen on a Saturday morning. These were the things that reminded me of how far I'd come, how far we had come. Our daughter, Sophie, grew into a curious, kind-hearted child. She asked questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Why do people hurt each other sometimes? What makes someone a good person? And each question made me reflect on my own journey, on the choices I'd made, and the lessons I'd learned. I wanted to give her honest answers, not to protect her from the hard truths of life, but to help her navigate them with strength and compassion. Clara and I faced challenges, of course. No marriage is without them. There were times when stress from work, from parenting, from life itself, made us short with each other. There were disagreements, moments of doubt, times when we had to remind ourselves why we chose each other in the first place. But we always came back to the promise we made at the beginning to talk, to listen, to fight for what we had rather than letting silence or resentment grow between us. And each time we did, our bond grew stronger. There were also moments of deep joy. I remember the day Sophie rode her bike without training wheels for the first time. The way her face lit up with pride and excitement, and the way Clara and I cheered for her as if she'd won a gold medal. I remember family vacations where we got lost on country roads and laughed until our sides hurt. I remember late nights on the porch with Claire, the two of us wrapped in a blanket, talking about our dreams for the future. As the years went on, I found myself thinking less and less about the betrayal that had once consumed me. It didn't haunt me anymore. It didn't define me. Instead, it became something distant, like a scar that had faded with time. A reminder of what I'd survived, but no longer a source of pain. I realized that forgiveness, real forgiveness, wasn't about excusing what had been done to me. It was about releasing myself from the weight of anger and bitterness, about choosing peace over resentment. I also saw my ex-wife once, unexpectedly, at a grocery store. We exchanged a polite nod, nothing more. In that moment, I felt no anger, no sadness. Just a quiet acceptance that we were the people who had once shared a life, and who had both moved on. I wished her well in my heart and walked away, grateful for the life I had now. Clara and I grew older together, and with age came new challenges, health scares that reminded us of our fragility, friends and family we said goodbye to, changes that tested our resilience. But through it all, we held onto each other, knowing that what we'd built together could withstand whatever storms came our way. Sophie eventually left for college, chasing her own dreams, and the house felt quieter without her. But Clara and I found new ways to fill the space with shared hobbies, with community work, with simple pleasures like tending the garden or cooking together. And every so often, Sophie would come home, and the house would fill again with the warmth of her presence, with laughter and conversation that stretched late into the night. Looking back, I sometimes marveled at how much a single moment of betrayal had once threatened to define my life, and how, in the end, it had only shaped me into someone stronger, someone more compassionate, someone who knew the value of honesty and love. I had taken what could have destroyed me and used it to build something beautiful. If there's one thing I hope Sophie learns from me, it's that strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising after you fall. It's about choosing love when it would be easier to close your heart. It's about building a life that reflects your truest values, no matter what storms you face. And as I sit now, watching the sun set over our quiet street, with Claire beside me, I know without doubt or regret that I am exactly where I am meant to be. Not in spite of the past, but because of it. When my father passed away, it felt like my whole world cracked open. He had been my rock, my steady hand through every storm life threw at me. I was 20 at the time, just starting to figure out what adulthood meant, and losing him left me feeling untethered. But in his will, he left me something that I thought would help me hold on a place to belong. Our family home. The house where I'd grown up, where every corner was filled with memories of better days. A place that felt safe. At first, it seemed like that home would be the one thing keeping me grounded. I remember reading the letter Dad had written to accompany the will. His words were simple, but they carried so much love. I want you to always have a roof over your head, a place where you feel at peace. This house is yours now. Make it your own. I clutched that letter like it was a lifeline, like maybe his handwriting could somehow make the loss hurt less. But what I didn't see coming was how quickly everything would change after he was gone. My mom had always been distant with me, even when Dad was alive. They'd grown apart over the years, and after he passed, it was like she saw his absence as a kind of freedom. Within months, she started dating someone new. His name was Greg, and from the moment I met him, I felt like I was an outsider in my own life. Greg had two kids from a previous marriage, a boy a few years younger than me and a girl who was still in high school. I tried to be polite, tried to welcome them, but there was always this tension, like I was the one intruding. At first, Mom said she just wanted Greg and his kids to visit now and then. But visits turned into overnight stays, and overnight stays turned into them bringing over more and more of their things. Before long, Greg's kids were there more often than not, and it felt like they were slowly taking over the space that was supposed to be mine. The house I'd inherited, the house Dad had left to me. I remember the day it all came to a head. I came home from work, a part-time job I was juggling while going to school, and found Greg's son setting up a drum set in what had been my dad's study. The study I'd kept untouched because it still smelled like him, still felt like him. My stomach dropped, and I asked what he was doing. He just shrugged and said, "Your mom said I could have this room." I stood there in shock, looking around at the boxes stacked against the walls, my dad's books shoved aside, his desk covered in someone else's things. That night, I confronted Mom. I told her that the house was mine, that Dad had left it to me for a reason. She didn't even look guilty. She just sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "You don't need all this space," she said. "Greg's kids need rooms. You're hardly ever here anyway. It's not fair to them." I tried to remind her that this was the home Dad had wanted me to have. But she waved me off, telling me I was being selfish, that it was time for me to move on with my life and let her have this fresh start with her new family. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to turn my grief into a battleground. But little by little, I felt myself being pushed out. My bedroom became a shared space for storage. The living room started to fill with furniture that wasn't ours. The kitchen felt foreign, filled with things I didn't recognize. And the worst part was how invisible I felt. Like I didn't belong anymore in the place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. Eventually, the tension became too much. One evening, after another argument where Mom told me I was making things difficult, she said it outright. "Maybe it's best if you find somewhere else to stay." Greg's kids need stability. You're old enough to figure it out. And just like that, I was cast out of the house my dad had left me. I remember packing my bags in silence, trying not to let her see how much it hurt. I moved into a tiny apartment with a friend, barely able to afford rent, working extra shifts just to get by. I thought about fighting it legally. After all, the house was mine on paper. But I kept hearing Dad's voice in my head, the one that always urged me to choose kindness over conflict, to rise above. I didn't want to drag his memory into a courtroom. And part of me was just too tired. Grief and betrayal together can make even the strongest person feel weak. In the months that followed, I tried to focus on rebuilding. I finished school. I worked hard. I made a life for myself outside the walls of that house. But the ache of what had happened never fully went away. Every time I passed by the old neighborhood, I felt a pull in my chest, a longing for what had been taken from me, not just the house, but the sense of security, of belonging. Years went by, and slowly, I learned to let go. The house was just a place, I told myself. What really mattered were the values Dad had given me, the strength to stand on my own, the integrity to choose the high road even when it cost me. I built a new home, not as grand as the one I'd grown up in, but filled with love, with honesty, with people who chose me as much as I chose them. Looking back now, I see that losing the house taught me something important, that home isn't always a structure with walls and a roof. Home is where you're seen, where you're valued, where you're safe to be who you are. And sometimes, we have to create that space for ourselves when others fail us. If I could speak to my mom today, I'd tell her that I forgave her not for her sake, but for mine. Carrying anger was a weight I didn't want anymore. And if I could speak to my dad, I'd tell him thank you. Thank you for trusting me, for leaving me something that taught me so much about resilience, about loss, about starting over. Because in the end, what I inherited from him wasn't just a house. It was the strength to build a life on my own terms. Time kept moving, whether I was ready for it or not. Days turned into months, months into years. I worked hard, pouring myself into my career. At first, it was mostly out of necessity. I needed to survive, to pay rent, to afford groceries, but over time, it became something more. Work gave me purpose. It gave me a sense of accomplishment that no one could take from me. I built a small but meaningful life, brick by brick, choice by choice. There were lonely nights, of course. Nights when I lay awake and wondered how things might have been different if Mom had chosen me. Nights when I imagined what it would have felt like to come home to that house, to fill it with my own family, my own memories. But over time, those nights became fewer. They dulled, replaced by something quieter, acceptance, maybe. Or simply the recognition that life doesn't always go the way we plan, and that's okay. I didn't speak to Mom much during those first years. We became strangers, living parallel lives that rarely crossed. Sometimes, I'd get updates through mutual friends or extended family how she and Greg had renovated the kitchen, how Greg's kids were thriving, how they took vacations I'd never been invited on. Each bit of news felt like a tiny paper cut at first, but eventually, even those stopped stinging. I had my own path to walk. And walk it I did. I found joy in small things, weekend hikes, quiet mornings with coffee, books that transported me to other worlds. I built friendships that felt like family. I learned to cook, to garden, to fix a leaky faucet without calling for help. I took pride in these small victories. They were mine, earned by my own hands. Then, one spring, something unexpected happened. I met someone. Her name was Emily, and she had this quiet strength about her, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. We met at a friend's gathering, and what started as casual conversation turned into long walks, shared meals, and eventually, love. With Emily, I felt seen. Really seen. She didn't care about the ghosts in my past. She cared about the person standing in front of her, the person I'd worked so hard to become. Together, we built a home, not just a house, but a home. It wasn't big or fancy. A small two-bedroom with a tiny backyard and creaky floors. But it was ours. We filled it with laughter, with late-night talks, with dreams for the future. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I felt like I belonged. One day, out of the blue, Mom called. I almost didn't answer. The number popped up on my phone, and my thumb hovered over the screen. But something, curiosity maybe, or the lingering hope for closure, made me pick up. Her voice was hesitant and familiar in its uncertainty. She said she'd been thinking about me, that she missed me, that she wanted to reconnect. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to protect the life I'd built from the hurt she'd caused. But another part of me, the part Dad had nurtured, the part that always leaned toward kindness, told me to listen. We met for coffee. The conversation was awkward at first, full of starts and stops, of long silences and nervous glances. But slowly, we found our rhythm. She admitted she'd made mistakes, that she'd been blinded by her own need for a fresh start, that she hadn't seen how much she was hurting me. And for the first time, I believed her. Not because her words were perfect, they weren't, but because she looked me in the eye and owned what she'd done. Forgiveness didn't come all at once. It's not a switch you can flip. But that day, I took the first step toward it. Not for her sake, but for mine. I realized that carrying the weight of resentment had shaped so much of my life, and I was tired of it. I wanted to be free of it, to let it go so I could fully embrace the happiness I'd found. Over time, we rebuilt something resembling a relationship. Not what it could have been, too much had happened for that, but something new, something honest. She met Emily, and I could see the regret in her eyes for all she'd missed. But she tried. And that mattered. One autumn afternoon, as Emily and I sat on our porch, watching the leaves fall, I thought about Dad. About the house he'd left me, and the lesson I'd learned. That house was never meant to be where my story ended. It was just where it began. What I inherited wasn't walls and a roof, it was strength, resilience, and the reminder that home is what we create with the people who choose us, who stand by us, who see us. And in that moment, I felt grateful. Grateful for the journey, for the struggles that shaped me, for the love I'd found, for the home I'd built with my own two hands. If Dad could see me now, I think he'd be proud. Time passed, as it always does. The sharp edges of my pain smoothed over, worn down by the quiet consistency of daily life. Emily and I built something steady, something beautiful. We weren't perfect, no one is, but we faced the world together, and that was enough. We celebrated small victories, her promotion at work, the little garden we managed to keep alive, the first time we hosted Thanksgiving dinner in our cozy home. We found joy in the ordinary. Eventually, Emily and I talked about starting a family of our own. I was nervous. I wondered if the ghosts of my past would haunt the way I raised a child. I didn't want to repeat the mistakes that had been made with me, the feeling of being cast aside, of being unseen. But Emily reminded me, gently, that just wanting to do better was already the first step. And so, with equal parts hope and fear, we took that leap. When our daughter was born, I held her in my arms and felt something inside me shift. It was as if every crack left by my mother's choices, every scar from feeling unwanted, was suddenly filled with love so fierce it stole my breath. In that moment, I promised her, and myself, that I would always choose her, that I would always make sure she felt safe, and seen, and loved. That no house, no inheritance, no material thing would ever matter more than she did. Raising her became the greatest adventure of my life. The sleepless nights, the first steps, the scraped knees, the bedtime stories, I cherished it all. I found myself reliving pieces of my childhood through her eyes, but this time, I had the power to change the ending. When she fell, I was there to catch her. When she doubted herself, I was there to remind her of her worth. When she dreamed, I was there to believe in those dreams with her. Over the years, Mom became part of our lives again, not in the way she once might have hoped, but in a quieter, gentler way. She visited, she offered help where she could, she tried to make amends in the small ways that were left to her. I saw in her the weight of regret, and though it didn't erase the past, I respected her effort to face it. I let her be a grandmother, and in doing so, I found some peace. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was still and the only sound was the soft breathing of my family asleep around me, I would think about the old house. I'd imagine walking through its rooms, touching the worn banister, standing at the window where I used to watch the seasons change. But now, those memories didn't hurt the way they once did. They felt like pages in an old, beloved book, a story that helped shape me, but one I no longer needed to reread to understand who I was. Instead, I focused on the home Emily and I created. Our daughter's drawings taped to the fridge, the worn couch where we cuddled during movie nights, the backyard where we planted trees that grew taller with each passing year. This was my inheritance. This was what I would leave behind, a legacy of love, of resilience, of choosing kindness even when it was hard. One summer evening, as the sun set and bathed the world in gold, I sat on the porch with my daughter. She was older now, wise beyond her years in that way children sometimes are. She looked up at me and asked, "Daddy, what makes a house a home?" I smiled, thinking of all it had taken me to learn the answer. "It's the people in it," I told her. "It's the love you share, the memories you make, the way you take care of each other. A house is just walls and a roof. But a home, that's where your heart lives." And as I watched her take in my words, I felt that familiar warmth, the quiet certainty that, no matter how my story began, I had found my place in the world. I had built my own home, stronger than any foundation of brick or stone. And in that home, I was exactly where I was meant to be. As the years passed, I watched my daughter grow into someone thoughtful, kind, and curious about the world. With every milestone, her first day of school, her first scraped knee, her first heartbreak, I felt grateful that I could be there for her in ways I had once wished someone had been for me. She taught me as much as I taught her. Through her eyes, I learned to see the world with wonder again. Through her trust, I learned to trust myself. Emily and I worked hard to create a life that felt stable, but more importantly, a life that felt honest. There was no pretending, no unspoken resentments, no walls between us. We built a home full of small rituals that anchored us: Sunday pancakes, reading together on stormy afternoons, tending to the garden even when weeds tried to take over. These things weren't grand, but they mattered. They were the threads that wove us together. One autumn, something happened that I hadn't expected. I received a letter from a lawyer, one representing my mother's estate. Greg had passed away a few years earlier, and now my mother's health was failing. She had arranged to leave me the old house. The house that had been mine all along, and yet never truly mine. I sat with that letter for a long time, my mind filled with memories both sweet and bitter. I thought about my dad's study, about the creak of the floorboards in the hallway, about the sound of rain on the roof at night. But I also thought about the nights I'd spent lying awake, feeling invisible within my own home, the ache of being pushed aside. Emily found me sitting on the porch, the letter still unopened on my lap. She didn't say anything at first, just sat with me, her hand in mine. When I finally spoke, I told her everything that was swirling inside me: the confusion, the anger that still lingered, the pull of nostalgia, the fear that stepping inside that house again would reopen old wounds. "What do you want to do?" she asked gently. And I realized I didn't know. Part of me wanted to burn that letter, to leave the past where it belonged. But another part of me, the part that had always tried to heal, wanted to see the house one last time, to decide for myself what it meant to me now. So, I went back. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The yard was overgrown, the paint peeling, the windows streaked with years of rain and dust. But as I stepped inside, the memories came rushing back: my father's laughter echoing down the hall, the smell of his coffee in the morning, the warmth of the sun streaming through my bedroom window. And yes, the darker memories too, of the slammed doors, the arguments, the nights I'd felt so alone. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, breathing in the scent of old wood and faded memories. And as I did, something shifted. The house didn't feel like a monument to loss anymore. It felt like a chapter one had finished, one that had shaped me but didn't define me. In the end, I decided not to keep it. I didn't want to cling to a place that no longer felt like home. Instead, I sold it and used the money to create something new, a scholarship fund in my father's name, to help kids who, like me, had faced loss and needed a hand to build a future. It felt right. It felt like turning grief into something good. When I told Emily and our daughter about it, they hugged me, and in their arms, I felt lighter. I realized that home had never been about bricks or beams. It had always been about the people who chose to stay, the love that filled the spaces between us, the life we built together one day at a time. Now, when I sit on our porch and watch the sun set over the trees, I don't think about what was taken from me. I think about what I've built. I think about the laughter in our kitchen, the warmth in our living room, the dreams we nurture under our roof. And I know, truly know, that I am home. In the months after I sold the house, I felt something unfamiliar, peace. Not the fleeting kind that comes and goes with quiet moments, but a lasting peace, born from knowing I had finally closed that chapter the right way. The house no longer loomed over my memories like a shadow. It simply became what it had always been, a place where my story had begun, but not where it ended. My mother's health declined quickly after that. The call came on a gray winter morning. A nurse from the care facility told me Mom had asked to see me. I hesitated. Old wounds don't always heal just because time passes, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face her. But Emily squeezed my hand and reminded me gently, maybe she needs to say goodbye. Maybe you need it too. So I went. Seeing her after so long was strange. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I remembered. The strength I had once seen in her, the strength that had made decisions I couldn't understand, seemed to have ebbed away. She smiled when she saw me, and it wasn't the smile of a woman trying to hide behind pride or justification. It was the smile of a mother who simply missed her son. We talked. Not about the big things, not at first. We spoke about the weather, about Emily, about my daughter. She asked questions, and I could see she was trying to picture the life I'd built without her. And finally, after a long pause, she said the words I hadn't known I needed. I'm sorry. I thought I was doing what was best at the time. I see now how much I hurt you. I hope one day you can forgive me. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no grand gestures. Just a quiet truth, spoken too late to change the past, but early enough to soften its hold on my heart. And in that moment, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened. It was about freeing myself from the weight of it. I forgive you, Mom, I said. And I meant it. She passed not long after. We held a small service, nothing grand, just a gathering of those who had known and loved her. I didn't speak at the funeral. I didn't need to. My goodbye had already been said, my peace already made. Life moved on, as it always does. Our daughter grew, blossoming into a young woman full of promise and passion. She inherited her mother's compassion and, I like to think, a bit of my resilience. When she left for college, I felt that same ache my father must have felt when I left home, at the bittersweet pride of watching your child take their first steps into the world without you. Emily and I grew older together. Our hair grayed, our pace slowed, but our love deepened. We found comfort in the quiet moments, reading side by side, tending the garden, watching the sunrise and set from the porch where so many of our dreams had been dreamed and shared. Sometimes I still think about that old house. About the boy I was when I lived there, and the man I became after I left. I think about the way life surprises you, how it can break your heart, yes, but also how it can heal it in ways you never expected. How the home you build with your own hands and heart will always matter more than the one you inherit. And on those evenings, when the light is soft and the world feels still, I whisper a quiet thank you to my father. For the lessons he gave me. For the strength he left me. For the reminder that no matter what is taken from you, no one can take away your ability to build again. I have built. And I have found home, not in a house. Not in a place, but in the people I love, and in the life we've made together. And that, I know now, is the greatest inheritance of all.